Undercover boss catches manager messing with cashier. Watch what happens next is shocking. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed softly, casting a pale glow over the aisles. It was 10:30 p.m., and the store was nearly empty. Only a few late-night shoppers wandered the aisles, their carts half filled with last-minute necessities. At the front of the store, behind the checkout counter, stood a young woman named Clara. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Clara Cashier. She was in her early 20s, with tired eyes and a forced smile that barely hid the exhaustion creeping into her bones. Clara had been working at GreenMart for almost 2 years. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills barely. She lived in a small apartment with her younger brother, Kyle, who was still in high school. Their parents were gone, and Clara had taken on the responsibility of raising him. Every dollar she earned went toward rent, food, and Kyle's school supplies. She didn't have the luxury of complaining about her job, no matter how hard it got. But tonight was different. Something felt off. The air was heavy, and the usual hum of the store seemed louder, more oppressive. Clara glanced at the clock. Her shift was supposed to end at 11 p.m., but she knew better than to expect that. Her manager, Greg, had a habit of keeping her late without warning. He'd done it before, and he'd do it again. Clara sighed, her shoulders slumping as she scanned another customer's items. Greg was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. He walked the store like he owned it, barking orders at employees and glaring at anyone who dared to question him. Clara had learned early on to keep her head down and do as she was told. But lately, Greg's behavior had become unbearable. He'd started singling her out, criticizing her work, and assigning her impossible tasks. Just last week, he'd made her restock the entire dairy section by herself, even though it was a 2-person job. When she'd asked for help, he'd snapped at her, saying, "If you can't handle the work, maybe you don't belong here." Clara had bitten her tongue, but the words had stung. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to lose it. But the stress was wearing her down. She hadn't slept properly in weeks, and the dark circles under her eyes were becoming harder to hide. She felt like she was drowning, and no one seemed to care. As the last customer left the store, Clara began closing down her register. She counted the cash, filled out the paperwork, and prepared to hand it over to Greg. But when she looked up, he was nowhere to be found. She sighed, leaning against the counter as she waited. Her feet ached, and her back throbbed from standing all day. All she wanted was to go home, crawl into bed, and forget about this place for a few hours. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty store. Clara turned, expecting to see Greg. But instead, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He was in his late 30s, with short brown hair and a kind face. He wore a GreenMart uniform, but it looked off, like it didn't quite fit him. Clara frowned, her curiosity piqued. "Hey," the man said, his voice warm and friendly. "I'm Alex. New guy. Greg said I should come help you close up." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Greg sent you? That's surprising." Alex chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess he's not the most helpful guy around here, huh?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to say. She didn't know this man, and she wasn't about to badmouth her boss to a stranger. But something about Alex put her at ease. His eyes were kind, and his smile was genuine. She found herself relaxing, just a little. "Well, Greg," she said finally, shrugging. "He's not exactly Employee of the Year." Alex laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Clara couldn't help but smile. It had been a long time since she'd laughed at work. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like. As they worked together to close the store, Clara found herself opening up to Alex. She told him about Kyle, about how hard it was to balance work and family, about how she felt like she was constantly running on empty. Alex listened intently, nodding along and offering words of encouragement. He didn't interrupt or try to fix things. He just listened. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt seen. But their conversation was cut short when Greg stormed into the store, his face red with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he barked, glaring at Clara and Alex. "Why aren't you done yet?" Clara flinched, her heart racing. "We're almost finished, Greg. I don't care what you're almost finished with." Greg snapped, cutting her off. "You're supposed to be done by now. Do you think I have all night to wait around for you?" Alex stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Greg's rage. "Hey man, it's not her fault. We're working as fast as we can." Greg turned his glare on Alex, his eyes narrowing. "And who the hell are you? I don't remember hiring you." Alex hesitated, glancing at Clara before answering. "I'm new." Just started today. Greg snorted, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, new guy, let me make something clear. Around here, I'm in charge. And if I say jump, you say how high. Got it? Alex nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something Clara couldn't quite place. It was almost like defiance. But before she could think too much about it, Greg turned back to her. And you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You're staying late tonight. We've got inventory to do, and I'm not doing it alone. Clara's heart sank. She'd been looking forward to going home, to seeing Kyle, to finally getting some rest. But she knew better than to argue with Greg. He'd just make her life even harder if she did. Okay, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg smirked, clearly satisfied with her submission. Good. Now get to work. As Greg walked away, Clara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Alex looking at her, his expression filled with concern. Are you okay? He asked softly. Clara nodded, but the tears welling up in her eyes betrayed her. I'm fine, she lied, wiping at her face. I'm used to it. Alex frowned, his jaw tightening. You shouldn't have to be. This isn't right, Clara. She shrugged, forcing a smile. It is what it is. I don't have a choice. Alex opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, Greg's voice echoed through the store. Alex, get over here. I need you to help me with something. Alex hesitated, glancing at Clara one last time before nodding. I'll be back, he said quietly. Hang in there, okay? Clara watched as he walked away, her heart heavy. She didn't know why, but she felt like something was about to change. She just didn't know if it would be for better or worse. The next few hours passed in a blur. Clara worked tirelessly, restocking shelves and counting inventory, while Greg barked orders at her and Alex. But as the night wore on, she noticed something strange. Alex wasn't just following Greg's orders blindly. He was watching him, observing his every move. And whenever Greg wasn't looking, Alex would pull out his phone and type something quickly before slipping it back into his pocket. Clara didn't know what to make of it. Was Alex spying on Greg? But why? And for who? Her mind raced with questions, but she didn't dare ask. She couldn't risk getting involved in whatever was going on. She had too much to lose. Finally, at 2 a.m., Greg declared the work done. All right, that's enough for tonight, he said, stretching lazily. You two can go home. But don't be late tomorrow. We've got a big shipment coming in, and I expect everyone to be on their A game. Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door, but before she could leave, Alex stopped her. Hey, he said softly. Can I talk to you for a second? Clara hesitated, glancing at Greg, who was already walking away. Okay, she said finally. But make it quick. I need to get home. Alex nodded, leading her to a quiet corner of the store. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about tonight. You didn't deserve to be treated like that. Clara shrugged, her eyes downcast. It's fine. Like I said, I'm used to it. Alex shook his head, his expression serious. No, it's not fine. What Greg's doing, it's not okay. And I'm going to make sure it stops. Clara frowned, her heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? What are you going to do? Alex hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I can't tell you everything right now, he said quietly. But just know that you're not alone anymore. Things are going to change, Clara. I promise. Before she could respond, Alex turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, her mind racing. She didn't know what to think. Was Alex really going to help her? Or was this just another cruel joke, another way for Greg to mess with her? As she walked home that night, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. She just hoped it wouldn't blow up in her face. The next day, Clara arrived at work feeling more anxious than ever. She kept glancing at Alex, trying to read his expression, but he gave nothing away. He worked quietly, his focus entirely on his tasks. Greg, on the other hand, was in a particularly foul mood. He snapped at everyone, his temper shorter than usual. Clara did her best to stay out of his way, but it was impossible. He seemed to be targeting her more than ever, criticizing her every move and assigning her the most difficult tasks. By the end of her shift, Clara was on the verge of tears. She felt like she was being pushed to her breaking point, and she didn't know how much more she could take. As she clocked out, she noticed Alex watching her from across the room. He gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking away. Clara didn't know what to make of it. She felt like she was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand, and it was terrifying. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. She had to get home to Kyle. The next morning, Clara arrived at work to find the store in chaos. Employees were whispering to each other, their faces filled with shock and confusion. Greg was nowhere to be seen, and in his place stood a man Clara had never met before. He was tall and well-dressed, with an air of authority that commanded attention. "Everyone gather round," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "I have an important announcement to make." Clara's heart raced as she joined the crowd of employees. She glanced around, looking for Alex, but he was nowhere to be found. Her stomach churned with anxiety as the man began to speak. "My name is Daniel Harper," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm the CEO of GreenMart, and I'm here today because we've uncovered some serious issues at this store." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "The CEO? Here? What was going on?" "Over the past week," Daniel continued, "I've been working undercover at this store, observing the working conditions and speaking with employees. What I found was deeply troubling. There have been reports of abuse, intimidation, and unfair treatment, particularly from your manager, Greg." The room erupted in murmurs, but Daniel held up a hand to silence them. "I want to assure you all that this behavior will not be tolerated. Effective immediately, Greg has been terminated, and we will be conducting a full investigation into the practices at this store to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." Clara felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Greg fired? And the CEO had been here, working undercover? Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. And then it hit her: Alex. He hadn't been a new employee at all. He'd been the CEO, working undercover to uncover the truth. As the realization sank in, Clara felt a wave of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a flicker of hope. Maybe things really were going to change. Maybe she didn't have to suffer in silence anymore. Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. "I want to thank one employee in particular for her courage and resilience. Clara, would you please step forward?" Clara's heart skipped a beat as all eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, her legs trembling, as Daniel smiled at her. "Clara, you've been through more than anyone should have to endure," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But despite everything, you've remained strong and dedicated. You're an inspiration to us all, and I want to personally thank you for your hard work and perseverance." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as Daniel handed her a small envelope. "This is a token of our appreciation," he said, "and a promise that things will be better from now on." Clara opened the envelope to find a check for $10,000, a life-changing amount of money for someone like her. She felt like she was dreaming, like none of this could possibly be real. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much." Daniel smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No, Clara. Thank you. You've shown us what true strength looks like, and we're going to make sure that no one at GreenMart ever has to go through what you did again." As the employees erupted into applause, Clara felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she believed that things could get better, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. Moral of the story: no one should have to endure abuse or mistreatment in silence. True strength lies in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places. Never lose hope, because change is always possible. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Stories like these remind us of the power of kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or inspired you in any way, let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to share this story with others. Sometimes, a simple act of sharing can make a huge impact. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our community. We've got more heartfelt stories coming your way. Until next time, remember, kindness changes lives. See you soon.